No one needs you anymore. No one needs you anymore, said my daughter-in-law, her voice cutting through the Sunday dinner silence like a blade through butter. I nodded, took a sip of my lukewarm tea, and quietly made a decision that would change everything. 3 weeks later, I sold the house they were living in, my house, to a lovely young couple with twin toddlers. When the eviction notice arrived, I simply said, "Good luck finding a new place." The shock on their faces was worth every sleepless night I'd endured in that cramped back bedroom. Hello, dear ones. If this story resonates with you, please subscribe and share your own experiences in the comments below. My name is Eleanor Hartwell, and at 83 years old, I've learned that sometimes the greatest victories come disguised as the deepest wounds. The slow burn of invisible chains. You know, they don't tell you about the particular cruelty of becoming invisible in your own life. It doesn't happen overnight. Oh no, that would be too merciful. It's a slow erosion, like water wearing away stone, until one day you realize you've become a ghost haunting your own existence. It started innocently enough, as these things always do. After Harold died, my Harold of 57 years, the loneliness settled into my bones like arthritis. Michael, my son, suggested I shouldn't live alone in that big house anymore. "It's too much for you, Mom," he'd say, his concern genuine, but his solutions predetermined. "Come stay with us. We'll take care of you." What a beautiful lie that turned out to be. Sarah, his wife, had perfected the art of the sympathetic smile. You know the one, lips curved upward, while the eyes remain calculating. "Of course, Mother Hartwell," she'd coo. "We want you to feel at home." Home, as if I hadn't created a home already, as if the walls of my own house weren't soaked with decades of Christmas mornings, birthday celebrations, and quiet Tuesday nights when Harold and I would sit reading, our feet touching on the ottoman between us. But grief makes you stupid, or at least willing to believe in kindness that isn't really there. So I moved into their guest room in my house, because naturally they'd moved into my home to help with the expenses after Harold's medical bills had drained our savings. How convenient that their help required my entire first floor while I was relegated to the small bedroom upstairs, the one that had once been Michael's when he was 16 and angry at the world. The irony wasn't lost on me. Even then, the first month, I told myself, it was adjustment. Everyone needed time to find their rhythm. The second month, I began to notice the subtle ways I was being managed. "Mom, you don't need to cook anymore. Sarah's got it handled." "Mom, we've changed the locks for security. Here's your new key." "Mom, maybe you should ask before having friends over. This is Sarah's space too now." Sarah's space in my house, with my mortgage payments, my utility bills, my property taxes that I continued to pay even as I became a tenant in my own life. By month 6, I had learned to move quietly through the halls, to make my tea early in the morning before they woke, to accept that family dinners meant I could listen while they discussed their lives, their plans, their children's futures, all without consulting the woman whose name was still on the deed. And then came that Sunday. The words that changed everything. We were sitting around my dining room table, Harold's mother's dining room table, actually, the one with the carved legs that Sarah had always admired a little too much. The grandchildren were there. Emma, 16, and embarrassed by everything. Little Jake, 8 and more interested in his tablet than conversation. And Sarah's daughter from her first marriage, Melissa, 22, and as entitled as her mother. They were discussing summer vacation plans, a cruise apparently, Alaska. I listened as they calculated costs, debated cabin sizes, discussed excursions. The conversation flowed around me like I was a piece of furniture, present but irrelevant. "What about Grandma?" Jake asked suddenly, looking up from his screen. Sweet child, still young enough to notice when someone was being excluded. The silence that followed was thick with discomfort. Michael cleared his throat. Sarah's smile became more brittle. "Well," Sarah said finally, her voice taking on that artificially patient tone she used with difficult customers at her part-time job, "Grandma Eleanor would probably find the cruise too tiring. All that walking, the schedule changes. And honestly," she paused, looking around the table as if seeking support for what she was about to say. "No one really needs you anymore, Mom Hartwell. You'd be more comfortable staying home." The words hung in the air like smoke from a snuffed candle. I felt something shift inside my chest, not breaking exactly, but settling into place, like a bone that had been dislocated, finally snapping back into alignment. I nodded, took a sip of my tea, watched my son avoid my eyes, while his children suddenly found their plates fascinating. "You know," I said quietly, "you're absolutely right." That night, lying in my narrow bed in the room that had once held my son's baseball trophies and angry poetry, I stared at the ceiling and felt something I hadn't experienced in months: clarity. Nobody needed me anymore. They'd made that abundantly clear. But here's what they'd forgotten. In their eagerness to write me off, I didn't need them either. And unlike them, I still owned something valuable: the architecture of independence. The next morning, I called Harold's lawyer, our lawyer. Really, though, Harold had always handled the legal matters. James Fitzgerald had been drawing up wills and handling property transfers for 40 years, and he'd known us since Michael was in diapers. "Eleanor," his voice was warm with genuine pleasure, "how are you holding up?" "I'm considering some changes, James. Could we meet this week?" "Of course." "Everything all right?" "Everything's about to be." That Wednesday, while Sarah was at her book club and Michael was at work, I drove myself to James's office. Yes, drove myself. Another small rebellion, since they'd been suggesting I might want to give up driving soon. My reflexes were fine, my vision was fine, and my determination was crystalline. James's office smelled of leather and old coffee, comforting in its familiarity. He looked older than I remembered, but then again, so did I. The difference was, I felt more awake than I had in months. "I want to sell the house," I said, without preamble. He raised an eyebrow. "The family home. Where are you planning to live?" "I'll figure that out, but I want them out first." "What are my options?" James leaned back in his chair, studying me with the expression of a man who'd seen plenty of family drama play out in property disputes. "Well, legally, it's your house. You can sell it to anyone you choose. But, Eleanor, are you sure about this? It seems sudden." "James, let me tell you about sudden." And I did. I told him about the guest room imprisonment, about being managed and marginalized, about Sunday dinner conversations that flowed around me like I was invisible. I told him about my daughter-in-law's words, delivered with such casual cruelty that they'd actually set me free. By the end of our conversation, James was nodding slowly. "I see. And you want to handle this how?" "Quietly, efficiently. I want them to have enough notice to find somewhere else, but I don't want any opportunities for manipulation or guilt trips." "Can you handle the sale without my having to involve them until it's finalized?" "I can. It might take a few weeks to find the right buyer, someone who can close quickly." "Perfect." "Oh, and James, I want to buy something small for myself, a condo maybe, something that's mine and only mine." He smiled. Then, the first real smile I'd seen directed at me in months. "I think I know just the place." The sweet science of consequences. While James worked his legal magic, I began the delicate process of emotional archaeology, digging through my own psyche to understand how I'd gotten so lost in my own life. It wasn't just grief, though that had certainly made me vulnerable. It was something deeper, more insidious. Somewhere along the way, I'd confused being needed with being loved, being useful with being valued. Harold and I had raised Michael to be independent, capable, strong, and then when he'd grown up and built his own life, I'd struggled to find my place in the new configuration. When Harold got sick, caring for him had given me purpose again. I was needed, essential, the keeper of medications and appointments and small comforts. But after he died, that purpose evaporated, leaving behind only the habit of service, without the joy of mutual affection. Sarah had been quick to fill that vacuum with her own needs: babysitting requests, household management, financial contributions disguised as family togetherness. And I'd been so grateful to feel useful again that I'd ignored how different this felt from the partnership Harold and I had shared. Harold had needed me, yes, but he'd also delighted in me. He'd sought my opinions, valued my thoughts, included me in decisions, not because I was useful, but because he genuinely enjoyed my company. The difference was profound, and I'd been a fool not to recognize its absence sooner, but I was recognizing it now. The house sold faster than James had anticipated. The young couple, David and Lisa Chen, were first-time buyers, thrilled to find a well-maintained home in a good neighborhood within their budget. They had twin 2-year-olds and seemed to genuinely appreciate the built-in safety features Harold and I had installed over the years: the sturdy banister, the non-slip bathroom tiles, the good lighting in all the hallways. "Your grandchildren are going to love the backyard," Lisa said, during the final walkthrough, bouncing one of her sons on her hip while he reached for the apple tree branches. "I hope so," I said, and meant it. The house deserved to be filled with the laughter of children who were wanted there, not the sullen silence of teenagers whose grandmother had become an inconvenience. The reckoning, the eviction notice, was delivered on a Tuesday morning. I made sure to be home when it arrived, sitting in my kitchen, with a cup of tea and the morning crossword. I heard Sarah's sharp intake of breath from the front hallway, then rapid footsteps. "Eleanor." She burst into the kitchen, the notice clutched in her hand, her face flushed with confusion and anger. "What is this?" I looked up from 7 down. "Retribution, the punishment of someone as vengeance for a wrong or criminal act." "What does it look like?" "It says we have 30 days to vacate. This has to be some kind of mistake." "No mistake." Michael appeared behind her, his hair still messy from sleep, his expression bewildered. "Mom? What's going on?" "I sold the house." The silence that followed was different from the one after Sarah's cruel dismissal. This one was electric with shock, and the dawning realization that the woman they'd been taking for granted might not be quite as powerless as they'd assumed. "You can't do that," Sarah said finally, her voice rising. "We live here. We have rights." "You have the right to find your own place to live," I said calmly. "You've had that right all along, actually. You just chose not to exercise it." "But where are we supposed to go? Do you have any idea how expensive rent is right now?" "We can't afford to move." Sarah's voice was climbing toward hysteria. "I'm sure you'll figure something out. You're both capable adults. At least, that's what you told me when you said nobody needed me anymore." Michael sank into the chair across from me, his face pale. "Mom, please. We didn't mean." Sarah didn't mean. "Oh, but she did mean it." I set down my pen and looked at my son, this man I'd raised, whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, and whose broken heart I'd mended when Jennifer Murphy broke up with him in 10th grade. And she was right. "You don't need me." But the beautiful thing about not being needed is that it frees you up to make choices based on what you want instead of what others require from you. "What about the grandchildren?" Sarah's voice had turned pleading, now, the trump card she'd been saving. "You're going to displace your own grandchildren?" "My grandchildren will be fine. Children are remarkably adaptable. They'll probably enjoy having a place that's actually theirs, where they don't have to tiptoe around their grandmother's feelings, or worry about disturbing the old lady upstairs." "That's not fair," Michael said quietly. "We never asked you to feel that way." I studied his face, looking for any trace of the boy who used to crawl into my lap when thunderstorms scared him. "You didn't ask me to feel anything at all, Michael. That was rather the point." Conversations that matter over the next few days. They tried everything. Tears from Sarah, strategic, I noted, and deployed only when Michael was present. Guilt from Michael. "Yo. What? You in for?" "The tipped her super. We tipped her super." Even an attempt at emotional blackmail from 16-year-old Emma. Grandma, this is going to ruin my senior year." But I held firm, and with each conversation, I felt stronger. Not meaner, not vindictive, but clear about my own value in ways I hadn't been for months. The most important conversation came on a Thursday evening. Michael appeared at my bedroom door, looking older than his 45 years. "Can we talk?" he asked. Of course. He sat on the edge of my bed, hands clasped between his knees, and for a moment he looked exactly like he had at 12, when he'd come to confess some minor transgression. "I don't understand how we got here," he said finally. "I think you do. You just don't want to admit it." "Mom, I know things haven't been ideal, but we were trying to help. After Dad died, you seemed so lost, so fragile. You thought you'd manage me. We thought we'd take care of you." "No, Michael. Taking care of someone means considering their feelings, their preferences, their dignity. What you did was manage me like I was a problem to be solved rather than a person to be respected." He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was small. I didn't know you felt so excluded, because you didn't ask. When was the last time you asked me what I wanted, what I thought, what I needed? I kept my voice gentle but firm. When was the last time you included me in a decision about my own life? But the cruise, we really did think it would be too much for you. Then you should have asked me. You should have said, Mom, we're thinking about Alaska. Would you be interested? Do you think you'd enjoy it? What would make it work for you? Instead, you had your wife announce that nobody needed me anymore. She didn't mean it the way it sounded. How did she mean it then? He couldn't answer that, and we both knew why. Michael, I said finally, I love you. I will always love you. But love without respect is just another form of control, and I'm too old and too tired to be controlled anymore. The new architecture of life. The condo James found was perfect. A 2-bedroom unit in a building designed for active seniors, with a doorman, a small gym, a library, and a community garden. It had large windows that faced east, so I could watch the sunrise with my morning tea, and a kitchen just big enough for one person who enjoyed cooking but didn't need to feed a family. Moving day was surreal. I hired professional movers. My decision, my money, my timeline. I took what was mine: Harold's books, my mother's china, the photographs that mattered, the quilt my grandmother had made. I left behind the furniture that belonged to my old life, the woman who had tried so hard to remain useful that she'd forgotten to remain herself. Sarah and Michael found a rental house across town. It was smaller than what they'd been used to, more expensive than they'd hoped, but it was theirs. The children adjusted, as children do. Jake actually seemed excited about having his own room for the first time. Emma discovered that her new school had a better drama program. Even Melissa, Sarah's daughter, admitted that not living with her mother's mother-in-law had reduced some of the household tension. I helped with the security deposit, not because I had to, not because they demanded it, but because I chose to. There's tremendous power in acting from choice rather than obligation. Learning to live again. The first month in my new home was a revelation. I woke when I wanted to wake, ate what I wanted to eat, watched what I wanted to watch on television. I discovered that I actually enjoyed cooking shows, something I'd never known because we'd always watched the news during dinner at Michael's house. I joined the book club in my building and was delighted to discover that my opinions were not only welcomed but actively sought. When I mentioned that I'd been a high school English teacher for 30 years before Michael was born, several residents asked if I'd be willing to lead a discussion group on contemporary fiction. I'd love to, I said, and meant it. The community garden became my special joy. Harold and I had always talked about having a real garden, but life had always been too busy, too full of other people's immediate needs. Now at 83, I was learning about heirloom tomatoes and companion planting, getting my hands dirty in the best possible way. My new neighbor, Ruth, was a retired social worker with a dry sense of humor and a passion for crime novels. We fell into the habit of having coffee together on Sunday mornings, critiquing the latest mystery we'd both read and sharing stories about our former lives. You seem so much more relaxed than when you first moved in, she observed one morning, about 2 months after I'd settled in. I feel like myself again, I said. I'd forgotten what that felt like. The grandchildren gambit. Of course, the separation from my grandchildren was the hardest part. I'd been a regular presence in their lives, and suddenly I wasn't. Sarah had initially tried to weaponize this, suggesting that if I wanted to see the children, I needed to be more cooperative about family arrangements. But children have their own agency, more than adults often realize. Emma called me directly one evening, about 3 weeks after they'd moved. Grandma, could you maybe come to my play? I have the lead in our towns and I really want you to see it. I would love to see your play, sweetheart. When is it? Next Friday at 7. But maybe don't tell Mom I called. I understood. Sarah was still working through her own feelings about the situation, and Emma was caught in the middle. But I wasn't going to let adult drama deprive me of a relationship with my granddaughter. I went to the play. Emma was luminous as Emily Webb, bringing a depth to the role that surprised me. When she saw me in the audience afterward, her smile was worth every moment of awkwardness when Sarah spotted me by the refreshment table. Eleanor, Sarah's voice was carefully neutral. I didn't know you were coming. Emma invited me. I see. We stood there for a moment, the weight of unspoken conflicts hanging between us. Then Sarah sighed. She was really good, wasn't she? She was extraordinary. She gets that from your side of the family. Michael was always dramatic too. It was a small olive branch, but I recognized it. Thank you for raising such a remarkable young woman. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I know, I said. I know things got complicated. I didn't mean for it to be so. I know, I said gently. We were all trying to figure out how to be a family without Harold. We made mistakes. Some bigger than others, she admitted. The long game of healing forgiveness, I've learned, isn't a destination. It's a practice. Some days were easier than others. Some conversations were stilted. Some family gatherings were awkward. But slowly, carefully, we began to build something new. Michael started calling me once a week. Just to talk. Not to manage my life or solve my problems, but to ask how I was, what I was reading, whether I'd tried any new recipes. It was a small thing, but it represented a seismic shift in how he saw me, not as a responsibility to be managed, but as a person whose thoughts and experiences had value. Jake began visiting me on Saturday afternoons, fascinated by the garden and eager to help with the planting. He had no context for the family drama, no grudges to hold or forgiveness to navigate. To him, I was simply Grandma Eleanor, who knew interesting things about tomatoes and always had good snacks. Even Melissa, Sarah's daughter, surprised me. She showed up at my door one evening with a bottle of wine and an unexpected apology. I was really rude to you, she said, without preamble. I treated you like you were just this old lady taking up space, and that was wrong. You're actually pretty cool. Thank you, sweetheart. That means a lot. Also, can you teach me to make that pot roast? I'm moving in with my boyfriend next month, and I want to be able to cook something impressive. We spent the evening cooking together, and I discovered that Melissa had inherited my love of storytelling and my tendency towards sarcasm. She was funnier and more thoughtful than I'd realized, and I regretted not making more effort to know her before. The unexpected gift. The most surprising development came from an unexpected source. About 4 months after I'd moved into my new place, I received a call from David Chen, the young father who'd bought my house. Mrs. Hartwell, I hope you don't mind me calling. We got your number from the real estate agent. We wanted to thank you again for the house. We love it, but also to ask you something. Of course. Well, we found something when we were cleaning out the basement. A box of photographs and some letters. They look personal, and we didn't want to just throw them away. The box turned out to contain Harold's war letters, correspondence I'd thought was lost years ago, along with photographs from our early marriage and some of Michael's baby pictures I'd forgotten about. The Chens invited me over for coffee so I could go through everything, and I found myself spending an afternoon in my former kitchen, holding pieces of my history I'd thought were gone forever. Would you like to see what we've done with the place? Lisa asked. Her toddler son balanced on her hip. I toured my former home, now transformed by the energy of young family life. The walls held children's artwork instead of formal photographs. The living room had been rearranged to accommodate toy boxes and a play area. The kitchen table, Harold's mother's table, which I'd left behind, was covered with coloring books and sippy cups. It looked exactly like a home should look, lived in, loved, alive. Thank you, I told them, as I prepared to leave. Thank you for bringing life back to this place. Thank you for selling it to us, David replied. We know you had other offers. The realtor told us, you chose us, because we had children. That meant everything to us. Walking back to my car, I realized that selling the house hadn't been an act of revenge after all. It had been an act of love, for myself, yes, but also for the home Harold and I had created. Better to see it filled with the laughter of wanted children than the sullen resentment of people who felt burdened by my presence. Full circle. A year later, I hosted Thanksgiving dinner in my new home. It was a smaller gathering than the old days, just Michael's family, Ruth from next door, who'd become like a sister to me, and James Fitzgerald, who'd become not just my lawyer, but a genuine friend. The table was small, the meal was simple, but the conversation flowed with genuine warmth. Emma told us about college applications. Jake showed off his knowledge of different types of lettuce, gleaned from our garden work, and even Sarah seemed relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in years. This place really suits you, Mom, Michael said, as he helped me clear the dishes. You seem, I don't know how to describe it, more like yourself. I am myself, I said. For the first time in a long time. I'm sorry it took us so long to see that you weren't just our responsibility, that you were still you. We all got lost for a while, I said. The important thing is that we found our way back. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, I sat in my favorite chair with a cup of tea and Harold's photograph in my lap. The apartment was quiet, but not lonely, filled with the residual warmth of good conversation and genuine affection. I think you'd be proud of me, I told his picture. I finally learned the difference between being needed and being valued. It only took me 83 years and one very expensive lesson. The photo smiled back at me with the same gentle humor that had carried us through 57 years of marriage. The woman I became these days, I wake up each morning with a sense of possibility that I hadn't felt in years. Some days I spend in the garden, coaxing vegetables from the soil and sharing my harvest with neighbors. Some days I lead the book discussion group, delighting in the passionate debates about character motivation and narrative structure. Some days I simply sit by my window with a cup of tea and watch the world go by, secure in the knowledge that I am exactly where I choose to be. The relationship with my family continues to evolve. We have boundaries now, clear, respectful boundaries that protect everyone's dignity. I see the grandchildren regularly, but on terms that work for all of us. Michael and I talk every week, but our conversations are between equals, not between a manager and a managed person. Even Sarah and I have found a way to coexist peacefully, built on mutual respect rather than assumed obligation. I've learned that love doesn't require sacrifice of self, that being family doesn't mean accepting disrespect, that being old doesn't mean being powerless, and being a widow doesn't mean being half a person. Most importantly, I've learned that it's never too late to reclaim your own life, to set boundaries, to demand the respect you deserve. It took losing everything. My home, my family relationships as I'd known them, my illusions about unconditional love, to discover that what I'd really lost was myself, and getting that back was worth everything it cost. Hello again, dear ones. Thank you for walking this journey with me. If my story has touched you, if you found yourself nodding along or thinking about your own relationships and boundaries, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Remember, you are never too old, never too powerless, never too dependent to reclaim your own worth. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and for others is to refuse to be taken for granted. Until next time, this is Eleanor Hartwell, reminding you that every ending is also a beginning, if you're brave enough to write your own next chapter.